Hello, fellow flamenco enthusiasts, and welcome to Everything Flamenco. I'm your host, La Hugo, and this is episode 43. So, we finished the real story of Carmen last week, a very shocking end, to be honest. I thought it was quite rough, but yeah. So, today we're going to read chapter 4 of Prosper Merime's book, which is a bit of background regarding his Romani studies, which I found very interesting. And maybe that will kind of just release me from the responsibility to do an episode about the background of flamenco. Although I guess I'll still have to do it at some point. So let's go to chapter 4. Spain is one of the countries in which those nomads, scattered all over Europe and known as Bohemians, Gitanas, Gypsies, Zigeuner, and so forth, are now to be found in the greatest numbers. Most of these people live, or rather wander hither and thither, in the southern and eastern provinces of Spain, in Andalusia and Extremadura, in the Kingdom of Murcia. There are a great many of them in Catalonia. These last frequently cross over into France and are to be seen at all our southern fairs. The men generally call themselves grooms, horse doctors, mule clippers. To these trades they add the mending of saucepans and brass utensils, not to mention smuggling and other illicit practices. The women tell fortunes, beg, and sell all sorts of drugs, some of which are innocent, while some are not. The physical characteristics of the gypsies are more easily distinguished than described. And when you have known one, you should be able to recognize a member of the race among 1,000 other men. It is by their physiognomy and expression especially that they differ from the other inhabitants of the same country. Their complexion is exceedingly swarthy, always darker than that of the race among whom they live. Hence the name of Kale, which they frequently apply to themselves. Their eyes, set with a decided slant, are large, very dark, and shaded by long and heavy lashes. Their glance can only be compared to that of a wild creature. It is full at once of boldness and shyness, and in this respect their eyes are a fair indication of their national character, which is cunning, bold, but with a natural fear of blows, like Panurge. Most of the men are strapping fellows, slight and active. I don't think I ever saw a gypsy who had grown fat. In Germany, the gypsy women are often very pretty, but beauty is very uncommon among the Spanish gitanas. When very young, they may pass as being attractive in their ugliness, but once they have reached motherhood, they become absolutely repulsive. I'm sorry, I have to stop that there. I think that is just a horrible comment to make, but anyway, I'm just reading from the book, so forgive me. The filthiness of both sexes is incredible, and no one who has not seen a gypsy matron's hair can form any conception of what it is, not even if he conjures up the roughest, the greasiest, and the dustiest heads imaginable. In some of the large Andalusian towns, certain of the gypsy girls, somewhat better looking than their fellows, will take more care of their personal appearance. These go out and earn money by performing dances strongly resembling those forbidden at our public balls in carnival time. An English missionary, Mr. Borrow, the author of 2 very interesting works on the Spanish gypsies, whom he undertook to convert on behalf of the Bible Society, declares there's no instance of any gitana showing the smallest weakness for a man not belonging to her own race. The praise he bestows upon their chastity strikes me as being exceedingly exaggerated. In the first place, the great majority are in the position of the ugly woman described by Ovid, casta quam nemo rogavit. As for the pretty ones, they are, like all Spanish women, very fastidious in choosing their lovers. Their fancy must be taken, and their favor must be earned. Mr. Borrow quotes, in proof of their virtue, one trait which does honor to his own, and especially to his simplicity. He declares that an immoral man of his acquaintance offered several gold ounces to a pretty gitana, and offered them in vain. An Andalusian, to whom I retailed this anecdote, asserted that the immoral man in question would have been far more successful if he had shown the girl 2 or 3 piastres, and that to offer gold ounces to a gypsy was as poor a method of persuasion as to promise a couple of millions to a tavern wench. However that may be, it is certain that the gitana shows the most extraordinary devotion to her husband. There is no danger and no suffering she will not brave to help him in his need. One of the names which the gypsies apply to themselves, brome, or the married couple, seems to me a proof of their racial respect for the married state. Speaking generally, it may be asserted that their chief virtue is their patriotism. If we may thus describe the fidelity they observe in all their relations with persons of the same origin as their own, the readiness to help one another, and the inviolable secrecy which they keep for each other's benefit in all compromising matters. And indeed, something of the same sort may be noticed in all mysterious associations which are beyond the pale of the law. Some months ago, I paid a visit to a gypsy tribe in the Vosges country. In the hut of an old woman, the oldest member of the tribe, I found a gypsy, in no way related to the family, who was sick of a mortal disease. The man had left the hospital, where he was well cared for, so that he might die among his own people. For 13 weeks, he had been lying in bed in their encampment, and receiving far better treatment than any of the sons and sons-in-law who shared his shelter. He had a good bed made of straw and moss, and sheets that were tolerably white, whereas all the rest of the family, which numbered 11 persons, slept on planks 3 feet long. So much for their hospitality. This very same woman, humane as was her treatment of her guest, said to me constantly before the sick man, "Singo, singo, umtehi mulo. Soon, soon, he must die." After all, these people live such miserable lives that a reference to the approach of death can have no terrors for them. One remarkable feature in the gypsy character is their indifference about religion. Not that they are strong-minded or skeptical, they have never made any profession of atheism. Far from that, indeed. The religion of the country which they inhabit is always theirs. But they change their religion when they change the country of their residence. They are equally free from the superstitions which replace religious feeling in the minds of the vulgar. How, indeed, can superstition exist among a race which, as a rule, makes its livelihood out of the credulity of others? Nevertheless, I have remarked a particular horror of touching a corpse among the Spanish gypsies. Very few of these could be induced to carry a dead man to his grave, even if they were paid for it. I have said that most gypsy women undertake to tell fortunes. They do this very successfully, but they find a much greater source of profit in the sale of charms and love philters. Not only do they supply toad's claws to hold fickle hearts and powdered lodestone to kindle love in cold ones, but if necessity arises, they can use mighty incantations which force the devil to lend them his aid. Last year, the following story was related to me by a Spanish lady. She was walking one day along the Calle de Alcala, feeling very sad and anxious. A gypsy woman who was squatting on the pavement called out to her, "My pretty lady, your lover has played you false." It was quite true. "Shall I get him back for you?" My readers will imagine with what joy the proposal was accepted, and how complete was the confidence inspired by a person who could thus guess the inmost secrets of the heart. As it would have been impossible to proceed to perform the operations of magic in the most crowded street in Madrid, a meeting was arranged for the next day. "Nothing will be easier than to bring back the faithless one to your feet," said the gitana. "Do you happen to have a handkerchief, a scarf, or a mantilla that he gave you?" A silken scarf was handed to her. "Now, sew a piastre into one corner of the scarf with crimson silk. Sew half a piastre into another corner. Sew a peseta here and a 2 real piece there. Then, in the middle, you must sew a gold coin. A doubloon would be best. The doubloon and all the other coins were duly sewn in. Now, give me the scarf, and I'll take it to the Campo Santo when midnight strikes. You come along with me if you want to see a fine piece of witchcraft. I promise you shall see the man you love tomorrow. The gypsy departed alone for the Campo Santo, since my Spanish friend was too much afraid of witchcraft to go there with her. I leave my readers to guess whether my poor forsaken lady ever saw a lover or a scarf again. In spite of their poverty and the sort of aversion they inspire, the gypsies are treated with a certain amount of consideration by the more ignorant folk, and they are very proud of it. They feel themselves to be a superior race as regards intelligence, and they heartily despise the people whose hospitality they enjoy. "These Gentiles are so stupid," said one of the Vasquez gypsies to me, "that there's no credit in taking them in. The other day, a peasant woman called out to me in the street. I went into her house. Her stove smoked, and she asked me to give her a charm to cure it. First of all, I made her give me a good bit of bacon, and then I began to mumble a few words in Romani. 'You're a fool,' I said. 'You were born a fool, and you'll die a fool.' When I had got near the door, I said to her in good German, 'The most certain way of keeping your stove from smoking is not to light any fire in it.' And then I took to my heels." The history of the gypsies is still a problem. We know indeed that their first bands, which were few and far between, appeared in Eastern Europe towards the beginning of the 15th century, but nobody can tell whence they started or why they came to Europe, and what is still more extraordinary, no one knows how they multiplied within a short time and in so prodigious a fashion, and in several countries, all very remote from each other. The gypsies themselves have preserved no tradition whatsoever as to their origin, and though most of them do speak of Egypt as their original fatherland, that is only because they have adopted a very ancient fable respecting their race. Most Orientalists who have studied the gypsy language believe that the cradle of the race was in India. It appears, in fact, that many of the roots and grammatical forms of the Romani tongue are to be found in idioms derived from the Sanskrit. As may be imagined, the gypsies, during their long wanderings, have adopted many foreign words. In every Romani dialect, a number of Greek words appear. At the present day, the gypsies have almost as many dialects as there are separate hordes of their race. Everywhere, they speak the language of the country they inhabit more easily than their own idiom, which they seldom use, except with the object of conversing freely before strangers. A comparison of the dialect of the German gypsies with that used by the Spanish gypsies, who have held no communication with each other for several centuries, reveals the existence of a great number of words common to both. But everywhere, the original language is notably affected, though in different degrees, by its contact with the more cultivated languages into the use of which the nomads have been forced. German in one case and Spanish in the other have so modified the Romani groundwork that it would not be possible for a gypsy from the Black Forest to converse with one of his Andalusian brothers, although a few sentences on each side would suffice to convince them that each was speaking a dialect of the same language. Certain words in very frequent use are, I believe, common to every dialect. Thus, in every vocabulary which I have been able to consult, pani means water, manro means bread, mas stands for meat, and lon for salt. The nouns of number are almost the same in every case. The German dialect seems to me much purer than the Spanish, for it has preserved numbers of the primitive grammatical forms, whereas the Gitanos have adopted those of the Castilian tongue. Nevertheless, some words are an exception, as though to prove that the language was originally common to all. The preterite of the German dialect is formed by adding "iam" to the imperative, which is always the root of the verb. In the Spanish Romani, the verbs are all conjugated on the model of the first conjugation of the Castilian verbs. From jamar, the infinitive of to eat, the regular conjugation should be jame, I have eaten. From liar, to take, lié, I have taken. Yet some old gypsies say, as an exception, chayon and lion. I am not acquainted with any other verbs which have preserved this ancient form. While I am thus showing off my small acquaintance with the Romani language, I must notice a few words of French slang which our thieves have borrowed from the gypsies. From Les Mystères de Paris, honest folk have learned that the word churin means a knife. This is pure Romani. Churi is one of the words which is common to every dialect. Monsieur Viduc calls a horse graisse. This again is a gypsy word. Gras, gré, grasse, and gris. Add to this the word romanichel, by which the gypsies are described in Parisian slang. This is a corruption of Romane Chave, gypsy lads. But a piece of etymology of which I am really proud is that of the word frumus, face, countenance, a word which every schoolboy uses or did use in my time. Note in the first place that Audin, in his curious dictionary published in 1640, wrote the word firlimus. Now in Romani, firla or fila stands for face and has the same meaning. It is exactly the os of the Latins. The combination of firlamu was instantly understood by a genuine gypsy, and I believe it to be true to the spirit of the gypsy language. I have surely said enough to give the readers of Carmen a favorable idea of my Romani studies. I will conclude with the following proverb, which comes in very appropriately. En retudi panda nasti abella macha. Between closed lips, no fly can pass. And that was the end of the novella, Carmen, by Prosper Mérimée. It was quite a fast-paced book, I think, for the time. You know, if you think it was written in the 1800s. And at the time, as you also noted from the events that happened in the book, it was deemed as very scandalous with debauchery and murder and whatnot, was really pushing the boundaries. So I'm going to close off this episode just by giving you a tiny bit more information on Prosper Mérimée. So he was born on 28 September 1803 in Paris, France, and he was apparently one of the pioneers of the novella. So novella is a short novel or a long short story. So as I mentioned before, Carmen is also a novella. And what was interesting about Prosper was that he wasn't only just a writer, he was an archaeologist and a historian, and apparently a very important figure in the history of architectural preservation. But his fame came with the publishing of Carmen, even though he also published other works before this, and he had many other accomplishments outside of the literary world. He wasn't even at the time deemed as a very serious writer. So how he came about to meet the Countess of Montijo, which told him the story that inspired Carmen. So, as part of his studies, Prosper made many long trips outside of his country to do research for his writings and obviously to study culture and things. And in June 1830, he traveled to Spain, and he really took time to explore the country because he loved spending hours and hours in museums, especially the Prado Museum in Madrid. And he also loved the bullfights, which is also a bit of a contentious issue, but at the time it was acceptable. And he intensely studied Moorish architecture in Cordoba and in Seville. And while he was visiting Spain in July 1830, the government of Charles X of France was overthrown and replaced by the rule of Louis Philippe I. And this made Prosper decide to rather stay in Spain a little bit longer. And during his stay, he met Cipriano Portocarrero in October 1830, and that is the guy who later became the Count of Montijo. And during his many visits with the Count, he then also met the Countess of Montijo, who told him the story that inspired Carmen. And the story she told him was apparently based on a real murder that happened in 1830. But the original story that was told to Mérimée by the Countess, Carmen was actually not a Romani. But since Prosper was really into the Romani language, like saw in chapter 4, and he was also into the culture in Spain and the Balkans at the time, he decided to make Carmen a Romani as part of his story. So in January 1831, Prosper returned to Paris, and then he began publishing vivid accounts of his trip to Spain in the Revue de Paris. And some of these accounts made the first mention of Carmen, which was now the story told him by the Countess of Montijo. And by 1867, Prosper unfortunately developed very serious respiratory problems, and he began to spend more and more time in the south of France. So he didn't really travel anymore. And by May 1870, his health had really worsened and he could barely leave his home. And then, unfortunately, he passed away on 23 September 1870, which was only 5 days before his 67th birthday. And sadly, the novella Carmen didn't become really famous until 1875, which is now after Prosper Merime's death, when Georges Bizet made it into an opera. However, I do feel we're very privileged to still be able to enjoy his literary works today, and that I was able to share this with you all. So that was the end of episode 43. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more of the Romani and their culture, although I do think that some of the terms they use are a bit derogative, so apologies for that, it's not intentional. Just trying to be true to Prosper Merime's book. So next week we will delve a bit more into Georges Bizet, how he converted Prosper Merime's book, and a bit more about the opera. I'm not sure if it's going to be long enough for a whole episode, so I might include a little bit of the movies as well. We'll see how it goes, but I will see you in the next one. Ole!